Today we have my good friend John Kugel. John has worked closely with many of Australia's largest organisations for over 10 years, leading the delivery of innovative professional development, training and marketing programs. He is also the driving force behind Gone Bush Adventures and its engagement with the Australian corporate sector. He's a bushwalking and wildlife enthusiast who's both an experienced group leader in the wild and in the office. We speak of his journey in Australia to his travels in India. Everyone, please help me welcome John. Hey John, my friend, how are you doing today?
Hey Kevin, I'm doing really well today. How about you?
I'm very well. It's always good to see you, John, whether it's on our networking in nature walks or whenever we're at a story room together. It's always great to feel your energy and hear about all your stories. So I'm happy to have you on the podcast today.
Kevin, it's an absolute pleasure. And I feel the same. It's been really nice getting to know you, especially over the last few months as we've crossed each other more. So
yes,
really excited to be on your podcast.
Cheers, buddy. I wanted to start off with an interesting story, one that I've heard before, but the audience I think would really like. And that is the journey of Malakadani.
Yeah, Malakadani.
Yes. Let's get into that.
Yeah, it's a nice place to start. Malakadani is a small guest house in a remote village in northwest India, out in the Thar Desert and just outside a city called Jaisalmer, which is in the state of Rajasthan, which is the biggest state in India. It's like the most western major city before you get to the border with Pakistan. It's a really cultural place. The whole state of Rajasthan is, but particularly Jaisalmer, it's just a beautiful city with amazing architecture from a long time ago, 15th, 16th century, big palaces and forts, and a really vibrant, traditional and quite ancient culture there. And as I was traveling through about 10 years ago almost, I struck up a friendship there with a young man who was almost the same age as me to the day. So we had this kind of bond that we were almost exactly the same age. And he just randomly invited me out to his village one evening to go and meet his family and spend time out in the village. And at that time, I was only new to traveling India. And since I spent a long time and many trips going there, but upon first arriving in India, I was really struggling as a first-time traveler in that part of the world. I was getting scanned. I was having real trust issues. I was just getting overwhelmed with the experience. And I'd initially arrived in two much bigger cities, Varanasi and Delhi. So when I got out to Jaisalmer and connected with this young man whose name was Ombati, I really had my first fully heart-to-heart, beautiful connection with the Indian culture. And that was when I was taken out to his tiny little village. And when we went out there, we had to drive over the desert at night. You turn off the road that leads out of the city and you literally drive over the desert for a few kilometers before you arrive at this tiny village. And it was late at night, but still all the kids and all the families came out to greet us. And then I was just given this incredible welcome and hospitality that just took me aback, blown away by it really, and how they welcomed me in. And I spent quite a bit of time at that village. I started building a friendship with all the families in the village, and particularly with this young man, we really had a good friendship going. And as I kept traveling around India, I started to get a sense that I didn't want to just keep going as a traveler to India, as a tourist, and getting caught up on the main tourist trail and going from Western cafe to Western cafe in different parts of the country. I actually wanted to go there and have these authentic connections with the people. So I started, as I was traveling, I started keeping my eyes out for potential opportunities where I could build these connections and maybe get involved in something in India. At the time, I was on a sabbatical and in a bit of a career break. So I just had this dream, maybe something could emerge from my travels that would be an ongoing connection to India. And the opportunity slowly developed with and with this village near Jaisalmer. Told me he had a dream to manage a guest house or a hotel. And we kept working on this dream and this idea, and it just really aligned with myself wanting to get involved. So we ended up jumping in, partnering up, and creating a small guest house on some of his village farmlands right outside his village. with the idea being that we would create an experience there for the general travelers, similar to the experience that I received as a first-time visitor to this village, in terms of seeing that authentic culture, not at all a commercial experience, but much more a cultural immersion and an opportunity to learn and see a different way of how people are living their lives. So that's how Malakidani was born, and it started being built in 2014 and had its first season in 2015. It's a series of 5 little huts, as well as like a common kitchen / cooking area. And we also allow people to sleep traditional style, which is just outside on these sort of beds, metal framed beds that you can just move around and sleep outside under the stars. Because most of the year there, the weather's quite comfortable, even around the evening. So you can just sleep outside under the stars. And it's been beautiful, because before Malakidani came along, particularly for this village and and his family, their way of life and the way they generated income was through real backbreaking labor. And there's still quite a few in the village who do this. They're literally cutting rocks out of the ground with stone tools. I describe it as how I imagine the pyramids being built by slaves when I see how this village works out in the hot desert sun, just day in, day out, cutting rocks out of the ground. The beautiful thing about the story of Malakidani is that now for my friend and his family and some of the other young villagers growing up and helping out with the guest house, they no longer have to break rocks. And as I said, that's not the whole village, but as it grows, it's flowing onto more and more in the village. So it's really nice. And the mix of visitors that go there to Malakidani is almost a split between foreigners and Indians as well. So it was funny. I met an Indian guy in Sydney in Parramatta at a networking event just the other week, and we were having a chat. And when I started talking a bit about Malakidani, he said, "Oh, I've heard about that place." And I thought, "Oh, you're joking. How could this guy in Australia have heard about Malakidani?" But sure enough, he was from Rajasthan originally. And it's slowly, the story is spreading and people have heard about it. And it's great because we've had even like some foreign travelers, influencers and photographers and musicians and different people who come, and they'll then share about their experience and more people will come. Early on, we had a really good wave of Israeli travelers and fantastic travelers throughout India. And once they get onto a new spot, they really spread the word. And yeah, it's slowly grown, but it's become this beautiful thing where now and his village are hosting a whole range of travelers from around the world and India. And they're still just being themselves. They're still just showing the world who they are and who their culture is. And people are really appreciating that. So and it's not at all a luxurious camp as well. It's quite basic, but that again it's part of the experience of wanting to give people the opportunity to live for a few days similar to how these people live.
What an incredible story and journey. I can only imagine. I'm just visualizing it as you're storytelling everything. And yeah, I haven't been to India before, but parts of Asia I have, and I can, obviously it's very different. As you were saying at the beginning, you got there and you was having a hard time adapting with, you're getting scammed, having trust issues. Yet you meet Ombati and then you guys hit it off. And you drive off into the desert with this guy into a remote village. That's a lot of faith and courage, John, especially after the experience you had. But when you connect with someone, I guess you can see the in their eyes and in their personality, how genuine they are. And with being a similar age, how bizarre is that to see someone across the world with such a different lifestyle? And it's like almost like a mirror image of yourself, but in a different lifetime.
Yeah,
can you imagine?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what hit me. Just so different, like the circumstances that you're born into and the life you live. People live all kinds of lives around the world, and I think it's only through traveling that you start to really appreciate that.
Yeah, I have these conversations with my partner sometimes, like imagining sometimes we travel back to your own country, like for example, Vietnam or somewhere like that, and I see people my age, it's like, could have been me. That person right there could be me, doing what they do instead of the lifestyle that I have here. So I'm very grateful and thankful to my parents who've made the trek here to immigrate and start a new lifestyle here. And they had to do the hard yards here for the lifestyle that I could live. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. No, that's right. And that touches on something pretty interesting too. And it's just this, I suppose, assumption that the life that we get to live in a country like Australia is more fulfilling than, say, a life lived in more of a developing place where people maybe aren't as wealthy materially. But one of the things that I observed so much deeper joy and happiness in the community as I traveled around India, and connectedness, than in many places that I've been around Australia. And so it did just make me think about what is wealth really. And also I noticed majority of the young people, they aspire to a Western definition of success now, which is really interesting. It's like this yearning to break out of the traditional life. And I'm not saying all, there is this overwhelming sense, and you meet people and the first question, is there a job for me in your country? No, they really have this idea. And it's a good opportunity also just to have a bit of a chat about maybe the grass isn't always greener, because in these countries where you think we're just all wealthy, we're actually on average a whole lot more unhappy as well. So it's a double-edged sword. I think it can be, at least.
I'm curious to hear your perspective. Like you said, over there, they might have a different definition of joy and wealth and of what you've observed. From your experience and being immersed in that culture for a period of time, as well as even working with them and staying with them, what would you say were some of your takeaways that you can share with us in terms of how they experience joy, or what did it redefine your view on wealth? Anything you can share along those lines?
Interesting question. One that's come to mind is just their openness and their generosity with their own time, in terms of giving time, giving their presence to, say, an outsider, and really seeking to connect and spend time and learn and understand. That's something that I think has stuck with me, because I think we can at times be too fast-paced and dismissive of people as we come across them in our culture. But they've got this a little bit more slower sense of time, and with that comes more time to give, to learn from each other. So there is more time that they have just sitting around in family groups or friendship groups, hanging out, just letting things emerge, just being, talking, learning about each other. That I think that's something in that culture that I observed and thought was a really nice thing to try and aspire to. Another one was the love of music. This is one that tied into my journey a bit, but I always traveled with the guitar, and I was always trying to learn Hindi and learn Hindi songs and play and connect with people as I went. But they absolutely love music. And I think that's music and the arts, and that side of culture is so important. Just people expressing and being free and joyful. For instance, you could stop in the middle of a street in India and take out the guitar and start playing something. It could be something that people had never heard before, but they will gather around and crowd around and curiously listen and take the time again and want to be part of that moment. And then if you happen to play a song that they know and that they love, it's just the reaction it's awesome to see, just that how much they value that side of life. And again, I compare it to sometimes trying to busk here in Australia, as I've done over the years, because I've played music since I was a kid and been in various bands. And you can be a great musician. I've seen really talented musicians you can play on the street, and still the vast majority of people will just walk past, head down, not give you 1 ounce of attention or energy. And it's just that difference of people are a bit more in tune with what's happening around them in those countries. As a result, they tend to be more engaging places, because you're being engaged as you move through, rather than here. You can almost slip through without being engaged if you want to. But over there, it's not really an option. Once you step outside the door every morning, things are going to start happening to you.
Well, you giggle about it. I'm curious if there's a particular story that you had in mind about things happening to you as soon as you step out the door. Did something come into mind?
Nothing in particular. I'm getting now flashes of different, just spontaneous things that have happened. But it's more just you walk down the street of a crowded market in that part of the world, and people will be calling you in or stopping you in the street to try and talk to you or sell you something. Or there's that level of interaction on the street level that is, I find, a bit more immersive. Yeah. So, yeah, and I think that might just be a product of people as a culture. They've invested a bit more time in that community space rather than wanting to rush through it on their own sort of personal mission.
Yeah, I mean, it's so different here. Like when I'm hearing that story that you're telling, it's, as you said, over here you can slip past without being present, and people guard their time so cautiously, and they're being open to connect. They're always weighing up things. Is it beneficial? Is it worth my time? These kind of ideas that come through their minds, and not being as generous and open to connect with people and being present about it. Yeah. I think at the same time, part of my opinion is that it's also counterproductive if you're always that guarding of your time. Look, I understand the idea behind it, but that's where opportunities expand as well, right? The opportunity to connect, listen, and hear stories and find out, what is happening around you and with people and being present about it. If you're always so guarding and you're like so picky about who you want to connect with all the time, I feel like that closes you off.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's closing you off to what you don't know as well. Try and keep everything contained in a little bubble that you know and that you're familiar with. But in doing so, you're right, there's that whole expansiveness out there of things that you can't even imagine, but you're going to experience or come through you through other people if you have the time to allow them to happen. So I think you summarized it very nicely.
John, with Malakadani, with the investment you've made and how you've changed the lives of the family you've touched there, do you have future plans? Are you thinking of doing more? Are they thinking of expanding from 5 huts to 10 huts maybe? I don't know. I'm just curious to see you taking it further in any way.
A little bit of expansion. There are plans for a couple more huts and one more communal space, but I can't see it ever going too much bigger because I think that would go against the essence of what it is. I think it has to be an intimate experience out there with the village people. Yeah, the last thing I'd want to do is be responsible for a big hotel or something ending up being out there just a few hundred meters away from where people are still living their cultural lives, which I'm super sensitive about getting in the middle of. Yeah, the amount of time I spent agonizing and debating with myself as whether or not I should actually get involved, because I realize it's a big thing to go there and shake up a traditional community and the way that they're living. Like on one sense, I would hope that I'm trying to help them access new opportunities, and that's what my friend is telling me. He wants that, and he wants more opportunities for him and his kids, but that could lead to, in the future, the kids moving away from the village, getting more jobs in the city. I'm not sure what impact it will have on the village. So I'm always so cautious about it. And that's something I've always tried and keep reiterating, is just wanting to keep the experience authentic and try and keep it a positive impact on the village community itself. Yes. One thing that interestingly we got built as part of creating the guest house was we got to tip in a bit of funds, but then also go around to neighboring villages and got a few more villages to tip in a small amount, and ended up building a little temple as well on the hillside just above the guest house. And it's a temple to their specific local god for that area and that specific caste of people who live out in that part of Rajasthan. So that's pretty cool too, just to know that as a result, people from nearby villages as well get to make this kind of pilgrimage, walk up this mountain and go to this little temple and have their spiritual moments up there. That's been a nice little part of the expansion.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much, John, for sharing the story about Malakadani and your various journey and trips over there. And I think this is a good segue, talking about walking up the mountain and going out into nature. about Gone Bush Adventures. So moving back to Australia now, you've started Gone Bush Adventures. What is the story behind that? How did it all come about? I'm very curious to hear how something like that came.
Well, you know my big brother Josh, and you actually knew him before you knew me, but Josh and I, as soon as we got out of school and got our driver's license and started to be able to actually explore around the place on weekends, we both really fell in love with bushwalking. We started just finding ourselves on all of our weekends out in the different national parks around Sydney and going camping out, just being blown away by nature. And growing up, we'd grown up close to the bush up in Hornsby, so there's bush all around, but we'd never really spent too much more time there than maybe the average kid would have. We did the odd school camp and that sort of thing, but it was only really once we got to university and a bit older, we started falling in love with it. Basically, this love for the bush was really sparked, and within a couple of years of that, we'd started taking out a lot of friends and colleagues and friends of friends out on these weekend walks with us. We started regularly walking with groups of 10 or 15 people out on these weekend walks. And just everyone who came out, we noticed that being in these natural places was having a profound impact on them, just as it was with us each and every time. It was like a sure thing. You go to nature, you feel renewed, inspired, refreshed, just content, at peace. It just happened every time, basically with everyone that we went out with. And to take us out of Australia again, Josh and I and our other brother Mike ended up doing a trek in Nepal. This was just before I first went into India. And over there, we were guided by a local guide, a beautiful man called Bharat. And the Nepalese hospitality, particularly when it comes to trekking, is world famous, because the way they put their heart and soul into guiding you, but also just their general expertise and love of their country and love of the places is just so infectious. So when we were over there trekking in Nepal, we started to really kick around this concept of wanting to bring that level of hospitality and passion back to Australia and do something with it in terms of getting people out to nature. And both Josh and I had more sort of corporate backgrounds, and we thought there's got to be an application to get teams and to get leaders out as part of the way they connect with each other and as part of the way they do professional development, because going out, doing a bushwalk, it's the perfect place to be more open and expansive in your thinking. It's a perfect place to actually go away and reflect and to just step away from what becomes the all-consuming normal of just the day-to-day city life, working life that we all live. So the idea for Gone Bush was born, and it was pretty much just that. Let's get teams and organizations out to nature, and let's partner with them and find out ways that it can enrich their culture and business by being out in nature as a team. But Josh and I, we were passionate and we believed in it, but we didn't have the expertise in the areas that we needed to in order to deliver the vision of what we wanted to deliver. We weren't specialist bush guides, and we weren't specialist facilitators when it came to the kind of programs we imagined delivering, like around team culture, leadership development, well-being. Sure, we could try our hand at it. We just knew there was this huge learning. But we looked around and we were pretty satisfied that there weren't any other operators quite doing what we had in mind. Like, of course, you can go out and do team building type events in nature as well. And people may have heard of Outward Bound, an organization that's been in Australia for 20 or 30 years now, maybe more. But their immersions, for instance, they last 2 to 3 weeks plus sometimes. And we just thought there's got to be this opportunity to create these immersive learning journeys in nature, but do them just for 2 or 3 days at a time. Do them where it's still got to get out of the everyday and make the effort to get out there, but do it at an accessible commitment of time that organizations might be comfortable committing their people to. It's funny though, 8 years into Gone Bush now in 2022, and we've worked with a whole range of clients, done all kinds of projects in different locations, and it's all grown and expanded really nicely. But it was such a slow start because we were just struggling to, I think, articulate it and struggling to put the pieces together. It took us almost 12 full months to get the first paying client. And that was despite us trying our absolute hardest every day. But we finally got there and got a couple of clients on board, and it did start to roll. And through actually delivering, we started to get better at it, but also started to build this network of other people that we started to collaborate with that started to make it basically what we had envisaged it to be. Like, started to work with these bush guides who just had knowledge like the bush tucker man and could just amaze the groups at, what's this, and just tell amazing stories about what's actually around us, and started to meet facilitators who could actually deepen the learning and connection experience of the groups that we were out there, and do it in such a spirit that felt really appropriate to the places we were going. So it was just this journey of then slowly getting better and better at delivering these experiences. And yet now to the point where we're partnered with multiple organizations working on their development programs. And most commonly, it still is in leadership development, but as well in terms of well-being and supporting well-being for their leaders, and working with these organizations to integrate nature-based experiences into their approach for this sort of stuff. And as I said, it started to take us to different parts around the country and different types of clients and collaborating with different kinds of people. And it's a really fun journey at the moment. It's been great.
I love this so much as well on so many levels. First of all, congratulations, John. 8 years in a business and sticking it out at the beginning, not giving up, reiterating, becoming better at it. Kudos to you, buddy. It's not easy to form any kind of business and to carve out something quite niche like you guys have done. Well done, and congratulations again.
Appreciate that. It's not easy, and you that too.
It's never easy, but we do our best. Yeah. So I love it on so many levels because it makes so much sense, like, to the target audience, or not purely just leadership, but I'm just thinking about even my own team, right? And this is just in hospitality. They work so hard. They're in the city. They don't get enough time off, and it really starts to hit your mental health when you're constantly like being battered again and again. It's a like high stress situation, and you just keep going. I feel like situations like that, when you get time to go into nature and you consciously pick it, it's like nature becomes its natural medicine for you. It cleanses you. You're able to check out and really improve your physical and mental health on different levels. And to be able to do that with the leadership team, or even a few of the staff, to go out and allow them and give them the space to check out, not focus on work, and allow themselves to immerse themselves on this, as you call it, like an immersive learning journey in nature. I think that would be so valuable for any team to be able to do that, let alone high stress working conditions, which pretty much everyone in the city is going through. It would have been such a massive impact. I'm sure it's made a massive impact in the lives of people that you've been able to take on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think it doesn't matter what your work is in. When it's on, it's full on, and it can be all consuming, and it is so valuable it's a discipline as well to actually make the time out and go into nature. One example on a personal level that I find is, as someone who has a business and lots of ideas and things going on, I wake up in the morning and I'm flooded with all these ideas and all these things that are going on. And sometimes I get a bit anxious about them because some of them are tricky things that have come up, or little problems that have got to be solved. And for me, I've got to be disciplined about waking up and first thing going out for that long walk or long run in nature, and really just centering myself and calming those nerves a little bit before the start of the day, because there is so much to do. But it's like that discipline of just not freaking out, stepping outside and just letting everything calm down a bit, letting things organize and prioritize a little bit, and then come back in a clearer way to be able to move on, keep going day in, day out, which is what it's all about too, because it's about sustaining yourself day in, day out, because it's a marathon, isn't it? It's not a sprint, and you got to keep showing up every single day. And even on days where you wake up just feeling sad or feeling not quite there, it's like you need to have these things that bring you back to the best version of who you can be to do what you're trying to do in the world. But on an organizational level, or specific professionals, like talking about your team in hospitality and the pressures, like one more parallel would be a regular group we've been doing for the past 4 years of school principals up in Brisbane. We've been taking a group of school principals out. And if you can imagine, school principals, is everyone's got anxiety about being the key person in their company. If they step out, what's going to happen? Who's going to do all these things? Because I'm not going to be there. You can imagine how principals feel. Like they got all the staff, all the teachers, they got an organization and a bureaucracy as well that they're managing. They've got the children, and they've got that pretty big responsibility, big pressure job. And they're at the top of that hierarchy, and they're alone at the top. So it's funny because for that program, candidates get to self-nominate into that particular program. And while it ends up being fully subscribed every year, sometimes it can be really hard to draw those principals out of their schools and give themselves the few days off to come along on this well-being retreat, because there's this sense of guilt from actually stepping away from their day-to-day responsibilities and putting some time back in for themselves to renew themselves. But of course, when they actually do step out and they get up to the bush, and you see all those pressures start to fade away, and through the walking and through the time in nature and the sharing with other principals and their peers, you just see the joy, the curiosity, the reflection, everything coming into play, building this beautiful perspective around what's going on, but also just giving them a space to nourish themselves again. Because I think that's just, especially now, I think more people realize how important that is, that as a leader and as anyone in a business or going through life, you really do need to treat yourself well to be able to then fulfill your responsibilities and do well by those around you and the business around you. Like you got to find ways to make sure you're showing up at your freshest self and to have the biggest impact. Yeah, you get to see it firsthand, and you get to just see people give themselves permission to just enjoy that experience, which is really nice.
Mate, well said. People can't just keep banging the hammer. You've really got to take time out for yourself to do what you need to do to refresh and click the restart button. Nature is a beautiful way to do it. And even the second part of what you were saying, I'm very guilty of feeling guilty about leaving my work. Like I get anxiety leaving my work, and it's telling me to take a couple of days off it'll make me feel anxious. But then you tell me to take a couple of days off and be completely disconnected. I was like, can I even do that? I don't know if I can do that. I feel guilt because there's so many things that I feel like if shit hits the fan, people need to, they need to connect with me. They need to find out what's going on. Who else are going to go to? But I think I'm long overdue for a complete disconnection with everything for a couple of days for my own sanity.
Let's go bush.
Let's go bush. Yeah. John, can you paint an overview picture of a typical Gone Bush Adventures trip for the audience? What does the structure look like? You head off for 2-3 days. What does the program kind of look like?
Yeah, it varies because we do events that range from really short events like the ones you've been coming to, networking in nature, that are just a couple of an hours walk around the gardens in the city. We also do shorter events to support offsite. So let's say a business is doing a conference up in the Blue Mountains or up in the Hunter Valley. We do shorter walks, half-day walks that slot in and complement those conferences. But we also do these more deeper dive immersions where we go for 2 and 3 day retreats in nature. And that's where we usually have the group overnight in some boutique accommodation on the doorstep of a national park and within really close distance of a trailhead. And it's where we do a series of day walks for the either 2 or 3 days with them and go on this journey together. But what it typically looks like, we deliver like an all-inclusive kind of experience. So that includes the transport, it includes the guiding and the facilitation and the food. It's the whole lot. So it's an experience. If you're with your conference group in the Blue Mountains, for example, let's just take it because it's a simple example of, say, an afternoon walk to support a conference in the Blue Mountains. So it would be picking up the group from their accommodation where they stayed, transferring out to a trailhead, usually within 10 or 15 minutes drive of where they're staying, just to maximize bush time, and going on, say, a 3-hour afternoon walk out to some incredible lookouts. But the interesting thing about the Gone Bush experience is that we're facilitating a learning journey. So our clients will often have specific objectives for their trip. If they're integrating it to an offsite, it might be a leadership offsite where they're working through some specific themes or agenda items, also doing some professional development around specific themes. So what our need is actually designing our bush experience to further that learning experience that they're doing. So we'll have facilitators on our team matched to the objectives of what that team's trying to achieve. If they're doing a leadership retreat and they're working on things like collaboration and building trust and communication within the team, we'll bring in a facilitator who, while we're doing that afternoon walk to those epic lookouts, will actually work through some conversations and reflections and sometimes even activities to help facilitate the team in seeing and developing in that area, whether it be their connection or collaboration or their leadership development. And then we combine that with having nature guides. So you've got this learning journey going on, but you've then also got nature guides tuning you into things around you in the bush, big things, small things, things that you might not pick up on your own as you're out there, and putting them into context of the learning as well that's happening. So trying to really get the nature guide and the facilitator in sync to get the group really having this tailored experience that's specifically trying to enrich towards an outcome that they're working on. And often great food is a part of it too. Gone Bush has got a bit of a reputation for our style of food, which is always just really fresh, really healthy, good food served in abundance. And I guess the style of service as well, I touched on that we were inspired by Nepalese guides over doing trekking in Nepal. And it's that same thing, that one of our absolute core values is joy in service. And it doesn't matter if it's from a facilitator or the guides or any of the crew, it's this, we understand that not everyone thinks going out to the bush is their cup of tea or their ideal way to spend their time. So we really try and create this nurturing environment where everyone can enjoy it. Everyone can step out and do these walks and enjoy it. And so another part of the Gone Bush experience is we actually tailor design all the walks that we do to suit the group at hand. We learn about the background of the group. If there's any, say, ability or disability or any particular ailments or medical issues within the group, and we'll tailor the walk to suit. And one of the things that we're trying to do is not be a Bear Grylls kind of boot camp type experience where we're just trying to march everyone down and make everyone super exhausted out there, but we're trying to create these experiences that are accessible to the whole team. It doesn't matter if you've got the dodgy knee or if you're in your 70s or if it's your first bushwalk. We select walks that are appropriate to the group to make sure that what we're doing is actually going to complement the experience that they want to have. So it's, yeah, and I suppose the only addition to that is if we're doing a multi-day retreat where it involves then the overnight and the next day. And that's when you get the opportunity to, at the end of a full day of walking in the bush, sit down around a campfire as a group, enjoy a beautiful meal, have a couple glasses of wine, and look up at the stars and take a bit more time.
Oh, that all sounds so good right now, John. Wow, you guys have really thought about this iteration time and time again of adding more and more value, tailoring it. I can really hear the level of effort that you guys have put in. Amazing work, guys. Really. Well done.
Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate
I'm going to have to hit you guys up for it, definitely. It sounds like such a great team or group event to do.
Yeah.
From the many trips that you've done, do you have one of your favorite trips, if you can share a story about that you've gone on and why is that one of your favorite trips?
Yeah. Can I share two? I'll try and share two
Yes.
briefly.
Sure. Let's do it.
First one, and this is not one that you might expect, but going back to that very first group that we ever did, I mentioned that it took almost 12 months of my brother Josh and I trying our guts out on this new idea and being told left and center that we're crazy and that it's just not a good idea. And no, that's not for my team. We want to go and stay in high-end hotels and drive Ferraris or whatever. But we stuck with it. And I remember our first trip, it was a small accounting firm from Sydney, and we had arranged to do a day trip, a day walk up to the Blue Mountains and back in a day. So a pretty big day. And we chose this epic walk up in the Gross Valley. So we probably bit off more than we can chew, but we got this small accounting practice to go and do an iconic Blue Mountains walk down into the Gross Valley and back in a day. And it went well. It was just facilitated and run by Josh and myself. At this point, we didn't have the crew, the specialist team, and the facilitators. It was a really stripped back kind of experience, but it was authentic and it was a beautiful day out as a team. But the thing I really remember was later that evening when we'd dropped the team back into Sydney, we'd returned the hire car, and Josh and I were back at our nan's house that night because she lives near the city. And we were finally back late at night, standing on her balcony, looking out over the city lights all sparkling at night. And we just looked at each other and we just said, oh, we actually have done it. We've done it. We've gone from this crazy idea and now we're standing here having just taken a business out on a Golden Bush adventure for the first time. And there was just something so magical about that moment, that first one, when it was just all still ahead of us. But we were just so happy and satisfied that we delivered for this first group. And it's a beautiful feeling.
Wow, I can only imagine. I mean, that the first time you ship that first client, the first product or first service, that first time is so memorable.
Yeah, you can never forget it. You put so much heart and soul into it. You start out from passion alone. And so it's amazing when you actually get to put that passion into practice for the first time and you get given that opportunity. But more recently, like trips that for me have still been a real highlight were some of the trips we were doing right before COVID hit. Like our business had really started to get on a roll, and it did, like a lot of businesses, it got smashed by COVID because all of a sudden groups aren't traveling interstate and meeting up and going out and doing these team building or professional development sessions in person. They're all going online. But just prior to that, we had really started to get on a roll. Like we built the business out across Southeast Queensland, Sydney, and around Victoria. And we had clients in all of those locations, and it really just it felt like everything was just falling into place. Like we were getting back from trips and just feeling as though it was really jobs well done. And we could see the transformation of the groups that we were out with. We could see really happy clients. And yeah, there's a moment that comes to mind. One of the things along the line that we became really interested in was collaborating with Aboriginal guides and facilitators to integrate traditional wisdom and that traditional connection to country through our programs, and to give people another lens to the experience out in the bush and another perspective on thinking about the things that they're thinking about. And I remember this trip, we were down in the Yarra Ranges, just outside of Melbourne. And it's a place where there's just these vast forests of mountain ash trees, like the biggest flowering tree in the world, these absolute giant eucalypts. And I felt like on this particular trip, it was with an amazing client. We're doing a great leadership program. We had just a phenomenal team. We had an amazing Aboriginal guide. We had an amazing leadership facilitator. We had amazing bush guides. And it was just one of those trips where you could just feel like this was special. And I remember this moment where Stuart, our Aboriginal guide on the trip, pulled up our group about 150 meters before we were going to be walking and arriving at the biggest of these particular mountain ash trees, this giant tree called the Ada tree, which people might know down in Victoria. But we pulled up a few hundred meters before the Ada tree, and Stuart just invited us all to do the walk up to the tree in silence and to do it slowly and give each other space and make it a really sort of poignant moment, because we were about to connect with something that's been there for hundreds and hundreds of years and learn a bit more about it. And I've just got this memory of Stuart leading us in towards the Ada tree, speaking out in language to the ancestors and to the old people and to the country. And it was just like this spiritual moment where you could feel everyone in the group had this sense of reverence and deeper connection with nature in that moment and with the place. And of course, when you then get to arrive at, say, the biggest mountain ash tree in Victoria, or arrive to stunning lookouts as a group in that sort of mindset, it's just really special. And I can't really even put it into words, but it's powerful. So yeah, that's just one trip memory.
Yep. Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing, John. I can only imagine how deep that experience would be. I think when you're involving, traditional owners of the land and the spirituality work that they bring and the understanding they have of the land as well, that brings us a totally different level to that experience, I think.
Yeah.
I'd love to experience what you've just shared. And I hope when people listen to this, that they would be keen to try it out as well.
Yeah. There's so much wisdom there. Of course there is, we all know it. Like, there has to be, for a culture that's out-survived every other one, as all the other empires rise and fall and succumb to all sorts of things. They've just been here, just being, just learning from the land. And so, yeah, there is so much. And I think that's increasingly is becoming something that people are seeking out in their experiences with us. Like, I'm starting to get a bit of a reputation that we do love integrating this kind of knowledge, and people are starting to seek us out because they're looking for that as well. They want that deeper connection, which is awesome. Yes. Because I think for a lot of us, myself included, you grow up in Sydney, you grow up in some of these, particularly Sydney, Melbourne, maybe Brisbane to a lesser extent, but you grow up in these major cities, and it's very easy not to really have much interaction with the Aboriginal community as you grow up. And then you grow up sort of wondering, is culture still here in the city? And this is something that through the Golden Bush journey, as we actively started to seek it out, we realized that of course it is. It's still here. And it was really surprising just to learn that culture is not only here, but it's still being practiced and maintained in the various countries by the traditional owners, even around the major cities that we've got.
Yep.
And they've retained so much despite such like horrific adversity, setbacks in that. It's great to actually be able to reconnect. And we get that feedback from a lot of clients too, that they, same as us, they grow up in Sydney or Melbourne and just, they haven't had the chance to meet and learn about Aboriginal culture. Not that they haven't wanted to. And of course, for most of us, when we've gone through school, we haven't really learnt anything about it either. Most Australian history is post 1778.
Yep.
So
that's true. Like I was also born and grew up in Sydney. Besides school, you could technically coast through your life without ever having to really interact or learn more about the original culture if we wanted to.
Yeah.
If we chose to do that, we could just continue to shut it out. But I think it's a very important piece of living in Australia to learn more about and connect. I think it's also part of our responsibility to experience that.
Yeah. I reckon you're right. Also think just quickly that given how beautifully multicultural Australia is and the fact that we grow every year by so many people from other countries, it's really important that there's opportunities for people to connect in with that deeper, older culture and connection to country that exists in this land, because we want all Australians to care for the country and fall in love with it and treat it with respect as our population grows. So I think, yeah, it's important that these opportunities exist and that it's good that people are curious and want to learn more, because I think it just breeds more respect for the country in Australia, which I think is really important, because we've got such a unique and incredibly rich country in terms of the nature and the cultural heritage that's here.
And it's great that you guys have developed accessible programs for people to come and experience the wisdom of Australia. So thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Kambush. What's one lesson your work in this industry has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in their life?
Such a deep question. There's a few. One lesson, I've definitely learnt this through Gombush and even through my previous professional job before doing Gombush, but it's just that every day will pass. This sounds a bit weird, but I mean it in the sense that if you're anything like me, there's sometimes when there's a huge moment coming up for you. Could be like for us, it could be doing a big experience for a big client, and there's so much organization and things going on leading to it, and it feels the stakes are quite high because you're so invested in it on all levels. It can make you anxious sometimes. Certainly for myself, thinking about that big meeting tomorrow or Kevin's podcast tomorrow, and am I going to do well and all these things. But one thing I've learned is that all those days pass. They do pass, no matter how big and daunting they seem in the lead up to them. And so just got to roll with them. And it's actually almost a blessing that those days exist, because I think those are the days that it's all about, because it's the ones that are a bit daunting that are the ones that are probably stretching you a bit more and getting you a little bit more uncomfortable, but they're the ones that ultimately can take you to the next level. So yeah, there would be a lesson just around, of course, having a healthy level of nerves because you care deeply about what you're doing, but not to be obsessively nervous or anxious about big moments that are coming up, because they will pass, and you got to keep them in perspective too. Sometimes I think in terms of this moment's big for me, but how big is it really? And just step back from it a bit to keep things in perspective.
Wise words, John. Wise words. John, there is so much more I want to ask, but I think we're going to save it for round 2 someday. Yeah, there's definitely a lot more that I'm going to move past just for today. But as we're reaching towards the tail end of our podcast, I love to ask all our guests a variety of quick questions. It doesn't have to be that quick. Do you have any morning or evening routines you can share?
Yeah, definitely. Morning routine, it's this simple. I wake up early, so my alarm's usually at 5. I allow myself to just slowly wake up, get the coffee on. There's usually, if with any luck, a bowel movement in there as well. And then I'm straight off into the bush on a long walk or a long run for at least an hour, maybe sometimes up to a couple of hours, and then come back, prioritize what I'm going to be doing that day for work, and usually then sit down with another coffee or have some breakfast and start to get into it. But yeah, a long walk at the start of the day. And the days that I miss it, sometimes it just feels like something's a bit off all day if I haven't actually done it. So the other thing I didn't mention was on those long walks, particularly in recent months, I've been walking with an earphone in and taking Hindi lessons while I walk. So I'm there walking through the bush, and it's great because there's no one there to laugh at my pronunciation, but I found this great podcast and learn Hindi on the go that I can just take these great lessons, and as I'm walking or running along, I'm slowly chipping away at developing this skill. Yeah.
That's awesome. That sounds like a great morning routine, to be able to be in nature for at least an hour every morning. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite book you'd recommend?
I've got favorite books in all different categories, but one, this is a bit of a wild card that I thought I might share, is this little book here called Trek Through the Backcountry by John Blay. And this guy just looks like a legend, doesn't he? He's there with this book. Actually, he's an environmental writer and adventurer. And this book won a National Parks Literary Award back in 1981. And it describes the journey that this guy, John, and his mule, Zachary B. Mule, They took for a few months traversing all the mountain ranges on the southeast coast of Australia, like the Dewar and Wadbilliga areas. And I just love it. I do really enjoy reading things that are people's personal accounts of events, and particularly in terms of adventures. And so the thing I love about this guy is he's just traveling through country with such a curiosity and finding all these incredible old things, old abandoned gold mining towns, and meeting all these old bush characters living remotely out in the bush. He found new species of plants and spotted animals that hadn't been spotted in certain places for a long time, and Aboriginal sites and all sorts of things. But he just has this fun spirit of adventure in the way that he writes. And you can just imagine one guy and his mule heading off into the mountains to this crazy rugged country for a couple of months to just go off on this adventure of a lifetime. And it's funny because that mule runs away from him every other night. Like, he'll go to sleep, wake up the next morning and be like, where is the mule? Where's Zachary? And realize he's got to backtrack half a day's walk to try and find his mule. He's just always getting himself into these situations. But look, that's a wild card. That's if anyone's interested in like the southeast New South Wales area, he's also got another book more recently called Searching Out the Bundian Way. And the Bundian Way is an old Aboriginal route between Eden, which is the most southern town in New South Wales, and the Snowy Mountains, Kosciuszko area. And that was always a traditional route that was traversed. Like, the Snowy Mountains were very well visited by Aboriginal people. And he's got this book where he's trying to piece together this route. And it's amazing because he starts up in the Snowy Mountains and just trying to follow the signs of the land and where it's taking him, he tries to piece together where this ancient route would have actually gone. And it's really interesting. He ends up collaborating closely with the local Aboriginal Land Council in Eden, and they're in the process of trying to actually open this route at some point in the future as another epic Australian walking route. But very interesting stuff. I love all these books that tie into different places in the bush and the history of them.
Wow, that is definitely a wild card and not something that I would have expected. But hey, that's the point of this, right? Open people to different ideas and different options. I'll keep that one on the list. Thanks, John, for the recommendation.
You're welcome.
Are there any new beliefs or behaviors that have had a positive impact in your life in the recent years?
Yes. Yes, there is. One behavior that's really developed has been getting off track. So I did a whole lot of my bushwalking, walking all the trails and exploring through the bush. But about 5 years ago, I was introduced to this group of old guys on the northern beaches of Sydney. This beautiful group of men, they call themselves the Old Desperates Walking Group. They're all in their late 70s and early to mid 80s, but every single week, like clockwork, they go out on these adventures into Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park and Garigal National Park. In the past, they'd also done a lot up in the Blue Mountains, but they'd go out specifically to get off track and see what interesting things they're going to find, whether it be amazing views, amazing plants, special sites. And they do find a whole lot of cultural sites out there when they're roaming around the bush. But myself and a couple of my buddies, we got walking with these older guys, and they adopted us in as the younger generation of their crew, which we're really honored by. But just through their approach to getting off track and the way that they go through the bush, it's completely changed how I personally bushwalk myself and with my group of friends. And I'm not so much talking about on the gone bush trips, because we wouldn't get a bunch of first timers in the bush to start going and doing off track type of walking, but more on our own kind of personal adventures, getting off track more, looking around more, taking more time just to be curious in the bush and see what's there. It's really changed the game, really. So yeah, it's something where I reckon if people listening to this are keen on bushwalking and they love getting out along the trails, if they haven't already done so, it might be worth just getting off track sometime and seeing what you might find. Obviously, you want to make sure you know where you are. You might not know where you're going or what's coming next, but once you do step off track, obviously you want to know where you're going in terms of navigation and not getting lost. But it's a completely different experience. It's all, sometimes I describe it like when you're walking along a fire trail or a bushwalking track, you're viewing the bush from mostly a side-on perspective. Whereas when you're walking through the bush without a track, you have this much more 360 perspective and a more kind of a choose your own adventure, choose your every step experience in the bush. And it's different. It's certainly changed and it's enriched my relationship with the bush. Like I was already in love with the bush, but getting off track and just being able to poke around, as they say, has been great and opened up a whole lot more possibilities out there too.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing. Get off track, guys. Get off track. If you could only send one single line of SMS text to yourself 5 years ago, what would it be?
Yeah, you know what, Kevin? I wouldn't want to send anything. I'd probably just send a blank message because I wouldn't want to interfere. I wouldn't want like the future me to be trying to interfere with the present me. And then if I write a message, I might interpret it one way and start doing something another way. I just want to let it unfold as it has.
I've never had any guest share that message before, so it's a unique one. Finally, John, how could people reach out or learn more about everything that you do?
They can hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. They can look up Gombush Adventures and they'll definitely find me there. They can Google me and various things will come up. They'll probably find Malakidani as well, the guest house in India. And I do a bit of music. So, you know, if you do Google me, you might even come across some of my music or my music videos. It takes your fancy, and I do welcome people to get in touch. Yeah, I think connecting is the richness of life. Yeah.
Thank you, John, for your time today. You're an amazing storyteller. I always love listening to your stories. I think they're so valuable, and inside them there is so much wisdom and lots of sage advice. There is so much more I want to ask you, and I reckon we could go for another hour easy, but for the interest of time, we'll just keep it as is for today, and let's do a round two sometime.
Absolutely, Kevin. And thank you so much again for inviting me on. Yeah, I'm also blown away by you, and I think you're an amazing individual too. I think you're an incredibly humble man who is doing so many great things. So yeah, I feel privileged to be your friend. So thanks for having
Thank
me
you
on.
so much, John. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
For sure. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show. All the links to the show notes will be available at kevinleesocial.com, spelled KEVINLY. Conversely, if you have any interviews that you'd love to recommend, please send it over to kevinleesocial@gmail.com. I'd love to connect. Thank you. Until the next episode.